Hello everyone, it's Brett here, Lionheart84, and I'm kind of revisiting a subject today that I've covered before a year or more back, which means that a lot of newer subscribers probably wouldn't have gone back and seen those videos because I've got a lot of videos in my playlists. And I have been asked recently on a couple of occasions if I'm planning to plant some of my fruit trees in the ground, or why haven't I got them planted in the ground. And I sometimes get the feeling, if perhaps when people see my videos they think that I'm only perhaps filming in a third of the garden, and magically I've got another 2/3 of garden that they haven't seen that I should or could be planting all my trees in. But in actual fact, what you see in my video is what I've got. So I just thought I'd explain why, the various reasons why I'm actually growing my fruit trees in containers, or most of them in containers, and some of the pros and cons of doing that, and my thought process behind doing it. Now, the first thing to talk about is the size of my garden. Now, when you look at those fence panels that run down the sides and the back of my garden, they're approximately 6 feet wide, or about 2 meters wide. So if you consider my garden space runs from the back of the kitchen there, where I've got my glass doors, I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, roughly 7.5 panels is the complete length of my garden. So we're looking at about 45 feet, or about 14 meters in length, roughly. Let's get my mathematics right. And it's about the same the other. Obviously, it's the same the other side. This first little bit, I've got a storage box here, which I use for pots and compost. And then basically, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 panels on that side as well. Now, across the back of the garden, it's about 4 panels wide, so that's approximately 8 meters wide, roughly 24 to 25 feet is the total width of my garden. Now, as you're probably aware if you've looked at the videos, a section of my garden is taken up by this decked area, so clearly nothing can be planted there, and I use that to put the tropicals out on in tropicals and subtropicals through the summer months. And then on the left hand side of the garden, I've got this raised bed which houses 3 Feijoa varieties, and a lemon and a couple of other bits and pieces. Then I've got the summer house which I put into the corner last year, which obviously I'm now using to overwinter the citrus, and so far it's looking pretty promising. A small raised bed there, and then the only free section I've got on that side, that is where all of my container grown fruit trees, which I featured in the video last week, and container grown fruit shrubs are stored, and the total, I think it came to about 85. Now, people do continuously say, oh, why haven't you got them in ground? Why haven't you got them in grounds? Well, if you imagine, the only spare space that I have in my garden is that section on the side there, which is about 1.5 fence panels. So it's actually only about 9 or 10 feet wide by about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by about 6 panels long, so 36 feet long roughly, and that is my space. Now, I have of course got a small lawn, needs cutting, but it's not been easy because we've had so much rain. Now, I like to have an area of lawn in the centre of the garden, and sometimes you have to look at the big picture in the future. It's nice to have lawn to break up the garden, and it also makes access to other areas much easier. Now, I've got people that I follow that would be getting rid of that lawn straight away, and you could probably plant about 6 fruit trees in it if you did away with the lawn. But I like to think about the future, and if I was ever to move one day, not everybody, in fact most people who would come and look at a house would like to have some lawn and other leisure space. They don't want to be coming to a garden that's just a mass of trees like a forest, certainly not in a suburban area, and certainly not if they've got children or animals. So sometimes you do have to consider the possibilities. Now, clearly, obviously I've got quite a large collection of trees and plants, which as I repot them, I'm going to space them out a little bit better, like I have done there, and use some of the extra space. They're the ones that I've repotted already. You can see the perlite on the surface of the pots. Now, these plants need space to obviously be able to expand a bit, but if you put fruit trees in the ground, realistically, they need to have a spacing of about probably 2 metres, about 6 feet minimum between them, and then you have to prune them to size to stop them getting too large, because you know, if you plant them closer than that, they're going to grow into each other very quickly and cause all sorts of problems. And also they need space for the roots to expand, and you need to be able to get between them to maintain the plants. Now, if you look at this space here, if I was to plant fruit trees in the ground, I would probably only get no more than 6 to 8 trees in the ground, rather than the 80 odd that I've got in pots. Now, one of the reasons I didn't want to do that is I wanted to have a big selection of trees, far more than anyone would need, but that was my interest, to have a lot of varieties. But I did also toy with the idea of possibly wanting to put a garage here at some time, which is why I wanted the plants to be completely movable so that I could move them on. Now, just to look at some of the plus and minus points of pots, clearly one of the things you've got to think about is that trees in the ground will invariably do much better than in pots. They'll grow a lot more vigorously, the roots can travel where they want to, they're less likely to suffer from either drought or overwatering, because if there's a lot of rain, the water drains away from the plants, and if there's a lack of rain, they can send the roots down and find the water. So you do need to be very wary with these container grown plants, that they can become very waterlogged, or in hot dry conditions you can easily miss watering the plants, which can cause serious damage to the roots, and then suddenly you end up with a dead plant. So the preferable situation would be to have your trees planted in ground if you had a big enough garden. Now, the advantage of them being in pots, it gives me an awful lot of flexibility. You can monitor the watering of them to make sure the ones that prefer to be drier get less water, such as the figs and jujubes, and the ones that prefer to be wetter, such as the pawpaw, can have the water levels, the watering ramped up on them. But it also means you can adjust the soil per pot. So if you have a plant that prefers a heavier wet soil, or a particularly well drained sandy bark-filled soil, it's easy to accommodate each plant's needs. And the same goes for acidity of the soil. Some plants, such as my citrus, prefer a much more acidic soil, and obviously some of the plants would prefer a more neutral soil, or potentially even alkaline. So it makes it very simple when they're in containers to amend the compost in that particular pot to suit that particular fruiting tree, to give it the conditions it's going to best respond to. They also have the advantage in pots, if you find the tree's not in the position you want it to be in, you haven't got to dig it up, you can simply move the pots around to give it more space, or put it in a location where it's getting more sun or more shade depending on its needs. So that suits me as well, plant wise. And the other thought is, obviously, you know, I've got a house I'm happy living in, but it's not my dream home, or a home that I would aspire to live in for the rest of my life if I could afford to buy a place elsewhere. So I would really rather have these plants in ground. So if I at one stage in my life managed to find the funding to buy a house even if it was smaller it wouldn't matter, but with more land in an area where the climate was suitable, obviously it'd be nice to be able to easily shift all these trees and move them to another garden where they could be either moved into bigger containers or planted in ground on the basis that I'd expect to be there. And my other thinking I've got is, if I do end up needing to stay here for the rest of my life, if you like, and some of the trees get too big, I just have too many of them, it would be relatively easy to sell them to people, obviously, if they're still growing in containers, because all they need to do is come and see the plant, and if they like it, pay for it and take it away in a suitable trailer or van. So if it comes to the point where I feel I've got too many of some of the types of tree, obviously I will be able to move them on. But I do think that the pot growing, the downside is the plants will tend to be very restricted in growth compared to being in ground, which does mean they'll be very shy on the fruiting, and it may well be that, in a lot of cases they won't fruit at all. But it also means if you get a tree that perhaps gets attacked by a disease or pest, I can move it away to another part of the gardens, keep it treated until the pests are dealt with. So there are a lot of minus points to growing plants in pots, but there's actually quite a few plus points as well. But my main restriction is size. I mean, that is the area that I have got to grow fruit trees in. So the simple choice was either plant maybe 8 in ground, and that would be all I have, or grow them in containers and attempt to have a much larger collection. I mean, they all need reorganising. A lot of these plants now need repotting, so my plan is to, as I work through them, trouble is I've only got Sundays really, and as you can see, some of the plants are coming into growth now, so it's getting a little bit late to be repotting them. But I do need to get a lot of these persimmons into fresh pots and fresh compost. I don't like disturbing persimmons because they don't take well to it, but a lot of these are starting to bud out now, which is exactly the problem I had last year. They budded out in March, and we had a snap freeze early in April, and unfortunately it destroyed all of the growth on all of my persimmons and a lot of the figs and the mulberries as well. So I'm hoping the same doesn't happen this year, and that we get a reasonably mild April. But I just thought that I'd make that video for people who had recently asked if I was going to plant a lot of my trees in ground, and if so, when I was going to do it. And the basic answer is I can't, because I don't have space. There is no more to the garden. What you see in my videos is the sum total of my garden space, and that's the situation I had to make for the circumstances in my life with work and my family. It may well be that one day that I could consider moving out further away from the urban area where I am, and possibly, if I move much further out, buy a smaller house but with a considerably larger garden, and then get a lot of these trees into the ground. But then you don't want to do that if you're moving to an area where perhaps the climate's not so favourable, because I've got a lot of plants here that enjoy the shelter of being in a suburban garden. So anyway, I think I've rambled on probably far longer than I planned to. That's why my fruit trees are all in containers. You may agree with my theories or you may disagree with them, it doesn't matter, but for sure if I had the garden space I'd rather have them planted in ground. But for the time being I'm making the most of the small garden that I've got and the small square footage. So thanks everybody for watching the video. If you've stuck with me, much appreciate it. Please give me a thumbs up, you share it with anyone you think might be interested in growing their fruit trees or shrubs in containers. Please subscribe to my channel if you think anything I'm growing might be of interest to you, and remember to click on the bell if you'd like to be updated on my new videos as they come out. I'll catch up with you all in the next video. Brett out for now.